Hi, thanks very much. Thanks for your presentation. I'm interested in when you say in your submission that understanding how climate action and transition is understood within the sector is a focus that we need to have, and also that you say the early stages of policy and practice in Ireland is what is required. So we have to get in there early and be inclusive and engage with those potentially impacted by decarbonisation. And if I may, I just want to talk and ask questions briefly about I think the one serious litmus test that the state has faced in terms of this is the Bord na Móna workers, the workers that had to decarbonise and were made redundant, not because there was, the normal redundancy would be because the business has gone down, but here the state took correctly the policy to shut down peat production to enable us to deal with the climate chaos that we're facing. And I think that's been a good thing, but I don't think the experience of just transition has been a good thing for Bord na Móna workers. And I say that because I did meet with a lot of them, and I did attend some IC2U seminars that were held in the Midlands to talk about this issue. And I think what happened there, and maybe you've looked at it, and if you have, I'd like you to comment, and if you haven't, maybe you'd comment on what I'm about to say, which is that although there was early discussions with the Bord na Móna workers, they certainly weren't collaborative. There was a lot of resistance from Bord na Móna management to allow certain sections of workers to apply for the redundancy. There was a resistance to absolutely firming down their pension scheme. And then alternative jobs that they were being offered were often at the minimum wage, without trade union membership, without pension rights enshrined in them. And to me, that is anything but a just transition for workers. And workers are not separate to communities, they are the communities. And particularly in areas like where Bord na Móna were producing the peat in midland towns and larger towns and smaller ones, this is what kept those communities going. And there's a bitter taste in their mouths about how they were treated. And I don't know if you know much about it, but I think if that's an early intervention, then we failed at the first hurdle. And what can we learn from that, and how can we get a better collaborative approach from all parties involved in the future?
Thanks, Deputy. Dr. Moore.
I'll answer that one, given I was working on the project. Thank you, Deputy Smith. I mean, I think it's a very sensitive issue, the Midlands and Bord na Móna workers. And at the time we were doing the employment vulnerability work, it was very much a live issue. So our work, while we can draw on some, I suppose, insights from both the case studies that Sinead Mercier did internationally, and we looked at the Midlands as part of that work and our own work in terms of trying to see, what the practices and principles of just transition and how can we see them in evidence. We weren't really in a position or it wouldn't have been, I suppose, appropriate for Nest to get involved in Bord na Móna specifically at the time. But I think even now we can see the funding being directed. I do think there would be great value in research looking at the Midlands to see how have things progressed for the workers impacted, for the broader enterprise and community groups in the area, to see how is the funding being spent in terms of what really makes a difference in a community, and how can we learn what best practice is? Because often, as you say, in a region impacted, it's a very time sensitive issue that if a state can get involved early enough, they can anticipate it. And we've examples from Spain and other areas in Germany where it was a very intensive, a regional focused, often with a steering group involved in quite large amounts of money invested in that region. But it can take years for some of those impacts to really be felt. So there is a tension there between, directly supporting workers impacted and then the region and the development of a region towards a low carbon alternative solution, that can take a much longer period. So I do think some of these issues are experienced across Europe. There is a platform for coal-intensive industries and regions that are really trying to look at some of these core underpinnings. And I don't think Ireland has all the answers. But I do think it's a really valuable exercise for Ireland to really look at the Midlands and to draw out some of that learning for perhaps the next sector that's impacted.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. And Ms. Garvey, do you wish to add to that?
As Jean has highlighted, she was much more involved in that project. So I take the deputy's points, and Jean has responded well in terms of maybe the need for further learning. The deputy did just ask a question around a little bit on the understanding aspect of the agriculture piece going forward. So just to elaborate on that a tiny bit, it's really looking at, I guess, how the issue is framed, how it's understood in its complexity, and with the perspective of, I guess, both those opportunities and the concerns, so such that they can be facilitated to be part of the vision going forward for transition in those areas. So that was just to explain the understanding part, but I understand your question more being in relation to the Midlands, which Jean has responded to. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Garvey, and thank you.